Hey folks, it's Abu here with a little disclaimer up top before you listen to this episode. In the discussion you're about to hear, Leo and I very boldly claim that Javico Carino is an original creation of the Dune Prophecy show and doesn't exist in the books. That is technically correct for Sisterhood of Dune, the book we're talking about in today's episode, but it turns out Javico does appear in later books written by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. So we just wanted to correct the record there. And also, that might be the case for other characters that we discuss in today's discussion as well. While they don't appear in Sisterhood of Dune, the book that we've read in preparation for Dune Prophecy, they might appear in other Brian books that we haven't read yet. Just wanted to make that clear up top before you hear us talk about it. Okay, hope you enjoyed this one. Today on the show, we're gearing up for Dune Prophecy. A new trailer is out, and we've got the hot, sweaty, sensual details that you, dear listener, may have missed with those lovely little peepers of yours.
Oh, so lovely. So. And then you just breathe out for 25 seconds. Welcome to Gom Jabbar, your guide to the iconic world of Dune. We'll be exploring the themes, philosophies, and characters found in the sandy depths of this vast universe, from Frank Herbert's groundbreaking novels to the adaptations on film and TV. My name's Leo.
My name's Abu.
He's dancing, folks, and today on the show, he loves to dance. He can't stop. We are talking about Dune Prophecy.
Oh,
very exciting. I'm sure this is not the last time we're going to talk about this. This is the beginning, folks. The beginning of an era. This is only the beginning. Indeed. A trailer just came out. The official trailer for the HBO Max television series, Dune Prophecy. First Dune television series in over 20 years.
Incredible. The
golden era for Dune fans. And we're going to be talking about it. Before we get into it, we have some housekeeping, of course. Our spoiler warning today is a little bit unique. We're going to be talking about the Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson series, Sisterhood of Dune. Try not to vomit, Abu. Sisterhood of Dune, and we're going to be making some informed guesses about Dune Prophecy. So if you prefer to head into this HBO series completely blind and just open to whatever it is, you've been warned.
You've been warned. And of course, at the top of the show, a huge shout out to our Kwisatz Haderach level patrons, Rob Silver, Daniel, Dion, Roman, Caballo, Jonathan Lambert, and C.R. Spruill.
Yep.
Folks.
Yeah.
If I was an HBO exec, I'd be scrapping all these other TV shows being made about whatever, all of these Game of Thrones prequels and sequels that are in development.
No one cares.
And instead, I'd make a show about the lives of our Kwisatz Haderach level patrons, about their gratitude, about their big hearts.
Yeah.
The
every episode.
Elevator pitch right now is not great, but I'll workshop it.
We'll work on it.
This will be a great TV show, I promise.
Yeah, we'll connect. We're going to push a television series all about you for sure.
Of course, that is a weird and long-winded way of saying thank you to our Kwisatz Haderach level patrons, but our gratitude extends to all of our patrons who support at every level. Without you, we could not make this show, and you truly make it possible. So thank you.
Indeed. So here's the game plan for today's episode. We'll be sharing some details that we picked apart from the Dune Prophecy trailer and using our knowledge of Sisterhood of Dune to give some insight into maybe what we might see in the show. I think right now the big question we all have is what this show is going to be.
Yes.
We have only a little bit of time until it's out, but this is the best and ripest time for some violent speculation. So that's what we're going to be doing. Quick note, this episode is going to be available as well in video format. And we're going to be trying out, if we're talking about a specific visual detail or something like that, we're going to have it up YouTube style. So you can absolutely listen to this episode, but of course, you can also check out this conversation on YouTube, which is going to be linked in the description below. So
that's right.
If you want to just listen, go ahead. if you want to see what we're talking about, have a click on that little linky and see what we're talking about.
That's right. Before we get into it, before we break down this Dune Prophecy trailer, let's take a quick breather. Let's prep ourselves. Let's do our stretches.
Yep.
And take a little ad break. But we'll be right back, folks. We'll see you in a minute.
Only our shoulders. Only our arms. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your break. Let's do it. Let's talk about the Dune Prophecy trailer that HBO recently shared. But let's also start by going over what we know so far about the series. So before we speculate, let's talk about what we know. Starting with just broad overview.
So, in case you don't know and you hit play on this episode by accident, Dune Prophecy is HBO's newest miniseries, and it's the first Dune television project since the Sci-Fi Channel adaptations over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And this show, Dune Prophecy, is sort of loosely based on the events of Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson's 2012 prequel novel titled Sisterhood of Dune. We'll be referencing that book all throughout today's analysis.
Right.
Now, the show's original title, in fact, used to actually just literally be Sisterhood of Dune.
Yeah, kind of on the nose. Sure.
Over the course of a bumpy production, lots of creative decisions being changed, showrunners and actors and directors coming and going. It's been a rocky road to this point, to the show actually coming out. And over the course of all of that, I suppose the direction must have changed, and so did the title. So now the show is called Dune Prophecy. And in fact, we have this great quote from the current showrunner, Alison Shapker, who told EW this about the show and its inspiration from the book. Quote, Sisterhood of Dune was our seminal text that we were working with and drawing inspiration from. Our story is tethered to the events in that book, but we also are telling a story that takes place 30 years after the events of the book. So we have both the book to draw from, but we also have room to develop our characters and tell the story of Valia Harkonnen across multiple timelines. End quote.
Yeah, interesting. A little bit the confusion we feel about, like, what is this show going to be about?
Yeah.
Not helped by that answer, where you say it's our seminal text, but we based all of the events 3 decades after the events of that book.
Right.
It feels very, I'm still not sure. I've read the book. I'm still not sure. And looking at the IMDb page, if you've read Sisterhood of Dune, you can look at the IMDb page. They have a lot of characters listed. Only like 3 of them are from the book. It's like Valia, Dorothea, Tula, and then that's kind of it. So it's clear that they've really taken some liberties. Like, it's clear they've really gone out and been creative within this playpen, within this sandbox.
Yeah, a lot of original characters, one of whom we'll talk about later today. A lot of character name changes, like the Emperor is still a Carino, but is not one of the named Carinos from the books.
Right.
We do want to say up top here that if you're curious about Sisterhood of Dune, the book, stay tuned, because Leo, you've read it and reread it. I'm currently in the process of reading it, and that's because we will be giving it a classic Gom Jabbar deep dive episode, as we've done on many other books in the Dune series. So keep an eye out for that episode. It's coming soon.
I gotta say, this book smells much better than it reads. Yes, it's gonna be good. And actually, I am excited to talk about it because a lot of fun things to talk about in the book. That might not be what Brian and Kevin were going like aiming for. Yeah, but we will be talking about it. We read the book, so you perhaps don't have to.
Right.
Now, to wrap up this sort of broad overview and setting the stage for Dune Prophecy, it's worth noting that the show will premiere on Max on November 17th.
Ooh, so soon.
So soon. Yeah, very exciting. And will release weekly up through December 22nd over its 6-episode run. So it's going to have 6 probably pretty chunky episodes and a lot of good content. The first 3 episodes of which actually already have titles on IMDb. And those titles are The Hidden Hand, Two Wolves, and Sisterhood Above All.
Okay.
We are going to be talking about all 6 of the Dune Prophecy episodes in depth on the podcast. We're going to be covering that quite intently. Of course we will. We're a Dune podcast, and this is a new Dune series.
Yeah.
So
Hell yeah.
stay tuned for all of that.
That's right. Okay. With the scene setting out of the way, now that you know what Dune Prophecy is and we know
Yeah.
what Dune Prophecy is, let's do some speculating. Let's break down this trailer and
Yep.
go through these 7 little details that we picked out from the trailer that we wanted to discuss today that might give us a clue as to what to expect when the show comes out. Detail number 1, the Reverend Mothers, specifically the first Reverend Mothers, is very likely going to be a major plot point in this show. At the start of this trailer, around the 13-second mark, we see what appears to be this funeral procession of
Yeah.
young sisters in the Sisterhood. In the book, there's a similar scene with a funeral procession that takes place for one of the sisters who had failed to awaken, who had failed to become a Reverend Mother. And this is a major part of the book itself. So in Sisterhood of Dune, there is a Reverend Mother named Raquella, who in fact is the only and the first Reverend Mother to ever achieve that status.
Right.
And when we say that, we mean Reverend Mother has unlocked her other memories, has gone through the spice agony.
Yeah.
She is the first and only to have done that in the Sisterhood. And Raquella, along with a Sisterhood mentad named Carrie or Carrie. Carrie.
I don't know. Yeah.
As well as Sister Valia Harkonnen. The 3 of them are attempting to basically figure out what the secret sauce is for awakening new Reverend Mothers. Raquella has been able to do it, but every time they keep repeating the experiment, these sisters keep dying. Hence, funeral processions like the one we see up top here in the trailer.
It is worth noting that in Sisterhood of Dune, Sister Dorothea, who's one of the only other named characters from the book that appears in the IMDb character list,
yes,
figures out the secret sauce and awakens as the second awoken Reverend Mother. And it's only then at the end of the book that Valia herself awakens. So
that's right.
It's going to be, naturally, the series is taking place 30 years later. So we are very likely joining an awakened Valia Harkonnen after she's gone through her awakening. And then we're going back and seeing young Valia who hasn't awoken, and we're going to see that kind of dichotomy. Now, another notable moment in the trailer is at the 2-minute and a 2-second mark, where 2 Bene Gesserit sisters, dressed all in black, are with a young woman who appears to be having something like a seizure, something like she's on a table and she's having a seizure. This is very likely what will be known as the spice agony, but an attempted Reverend Mother awakening, potentially going wrong, because shortly after we see who appears to be the same woman in these like shadowy underworld looking place surrounded by these ghosts, like really terrifying looking people who apparently attack her, is what it kind of looked like
closing
to me.
in on her.
Yeah, and it's not like a welcome party, like surprise, happy birthday. It's
actually, if you hit play, I think it's right after this, and at 2:03, 2:04 in the trailer.
Let's see. Yes, so right after, looks like the same person, 2:03, 2:04 exactly.
Yeah, and given that this is such a central plot point in the book, Raquella on this mission to figure out how Reverend Mothers can be awakened, I'm pretty confident in saying that this will be at play in the show in some way. Obviously, as you've stated, the show takes place 30 years later, and the formula, Dorothea has figured out the formula by then, and so Dorothea and Valia have already become Reverend Mothers. They've passed.
Right.
I think how to continue to do that safely and continue to bring more and more Reverend Mothers into the fold of the Sisterhood will certainly be an aspect that we'll see in the show. And we're obviously seeing flashbacks to young Valia during her time at the Sisterhood. So I suspect that in the earlier episodes, probably in the first couple episodes, we will see flashbacks that basically recount the story of the Sisterhood trying, failing, and finally succeeding with Dorothea and Valia in creating Reverend Mothers, and we'll probably see that come up for them within the Sisterhood for those two.
Absolutely. And it is a very interesting thing to consider. And
Yeah.
for all of my complaints about Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, it's an interesting thing to look at.
Yes.
And definitely an interesting moment in the Sisterhood's history of trying to strike that perfect balance. It's cool.
I agree.
Now, for detail number 2, let's talk about Planet Rossic. And Planet Rossic, to be clear, is where the Sisterhood is stationed when Valia Harkonnen joins the Sisterhood. So when she's 15, she joins the Sisterhood. They're on Rossic. Now, Rossic is described as being a thickly jungled planet, but there are these like cliffs and cities on the cliffs and things like that. By the end of the book, they have moved, once the Sisterhood goes through everything that happens in the book, the Sisterhood has moved effectively to Wallach 9. But throughout this trailer, we do see this sort of barren, rocky planet. The funeral procession happens on this rocky plateau. But also, at about the 7-second mark, we see what appears to be the Sisterhood kind of main base, or this institute, on this sort of rocky planet that has some foliage, but not a lot.
Yeah, I can see some trees on the bottom there.
Yeah. It looks like there might be some, again, all of this also could be the sort of like elevated bit, and in that background where you see the winding river, that might be sort of dense foliage that we're just not seeing in high resolution right now. So it is possible that this is Rossic. It's also totally possible that, to simplify things, we've just scrapped the multiple planets so that there's not multiple scenes and trying to remember where we are. It's possible we're just going to fully be on Wallach 9, considering we are 30 years later anyway. So that's kind of where our head is at. We think this is probably Wallach 9, right?
I actually think we'll see both, because we'll see a flashback. And then if you actually go forward in the trailer, if you scrub through, there's a shot of a different looking keep. Is that the same keep with the pointy things? Or is that 30 years later now with older Valia, you know? This almost looks like a different planet with a different Bene Gesserit institution that has 2 pointy pillars.
It's
versus
true that
this one has flat pillars.
I was going to say the 2 main towers of the building in this one, with the 2 Gom Jabbar like needles, by the way.
Yeah.
We have one tower that has a steeped roof, or like a pointed roof, and one that's a flat roof, versus this other. But see, this might just be a side view, because it's still 2 very prominent towers.
Yeah.
So, and then actually in the funeral procession, we see, we see 3 towers.
We see 3 towers in the. So how many towers? Where are we?
Their bold choice: 7 planets. They're going to show 7.
Right. I think ultimately the key takeaway here is it's going to be between those 2. Like those are the planets we're very likely going to see the Sisterhood operating off of. Whether we see both or just one, we'll have to find out.
Let's talk about highliners and some of the older technology in this trailer as our third detail. So
around the 20-second mark, early in the trailer, we see a shot that's very reminiscent of a shot that is iconic from the Villeneuve films. There's a highliner hovering near a planet, and from its gaping maw of a mouth, its entrance, we see tiny, tiny ships, which are actually huge ships full of hundreds of people making their way down to the planet. Yeah. And obviously a very similar shot was iconic in the Villeneuve films as well. So the TV show is very much establishing the same visual language and clearly trying to make sure that this is aligned with Villeneuve's vision as well that he created. Something to note here is the actual design of the highliner itself. Yeah. This one is much more boxy. Its mouth is more rectangle, more squarish looking, versus the very circular, tubular, like round style highliner that we saw in Villeneuve's film. Yeah. Why do we call that out? Well, it's fun to see the technology be different in this series, right? This show takes place 10,000 years before Paul Atreides. Right. Yeah. And so it would be kind of ludicrous to see the same exact technology present
Yeah.
that far
Yeah.
apart, you know? This is, I think, a sin that a lot of Star Wars properties will commit,
Oh,
where
totally.
we, like,
Yeah.
across hundreds of years, we see, like, the same speeder technology, the same ship technology, the same lightsaber technology.
Sometimes the same fucking ship. They're like, look, it's the
Exactly.
Millennium Falcon again. And you're like, what?
What?
You don't
We've
have other
never made a
ships?
V2?
You've never made a Millennium Falcon 2? Like, what? Same
Yeah.
operating system? Same. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is one example in the trailer where we see that. Similar technology, of course. We still need to align this story within the universe that it exists in and have some singularity there, some connections to the original source material. But it's fun to see that they've taken into consideration that the look of a Highliner, for example, would dramatically evolve over 10,000 years.
Yeah, 100%. So that's also like we want to see differences, but we also need some of that shared visual vocabulary to very quickly understand what we're seeing.
Exactly.
Another focus in the Sisterhood of Dune book is Joseph Venport. And Joseph Venport is doing his best to establish the guild monopoly, basically, that we are used to at the time of Paul Atreides. And we're going to go out on a limb here and say, I'll say my opinion is that whole plot is going to get cut from this show.
I agree.
The Sisterhood of Dune book can kind of be simplified down to like 3 or 4 big plots, and Joseph Venport's is a pretty big plot within the book. But when it comes to a 6-episode series called Dune Prophecy,
Right.
focusing clearly on the Bene Gesserit and this character we'll talk about in a second named Desmond Hart, clearly the focus is going to be on the Sisterhood and the Emperor, and that's just not Venport. So very likely that's going to be cut. But yes, it's fun to see this like 1952 Cadillac version of the 2024 Prius. Like, it's just fun to see these different generations of ships.
Yeah. And actually, 2 other things we wanted to call out. We get sneak peeks of old versions of technology we know from the universe. There's one at 2:14 or thereabouts where we see what appears to be a Gom Jabbar needle, someone reaching for a Gom Jabbar needle, which is very cool. As a show titled Gom Jabbar, we are contractually obligated to call out whenever we see one.
Yeah.
Very similar design, but again, slightly different, showing us that the design evolves over time. And then a few seconds later, around the 2:21 mark in the trailer, we see what appears to be a Fremen thumper, which is very cool. This one seems much clunkier than the like really sophisticated, nice one that Paul Atreides uses in the Villeneuve films.
And again, familiar beats and story elements to the Villeneuve movies. So very quick to get us on board. And we go, okay, yes, we understand.
Yeah. And again, this show is very much meant, honestly, like the target audience is people who saw the Villeneuve movie and want more Dune.
Yep.
And so the visual language has to be similar and has to be easy enough for them to connect the dots between these things. Let's talk about something, a totally original character and probably the most mysterious part of this trailer, even for us. Desmond Hart is an original character made for this show, played by Travis Flamel, and based on he's featured quite a bit in this trailer, and based on what he says and what he seems to be doing, he's kind of embodying this like charismatic leader type who is leading a number of masked guards. He's wearing all black, they're wearing all black. He's seemingly their leader. He's marching around with them. We see him speaking to the Emperor, so he's close to the Emperor. He's worming his way into the Emperor's thoughts and clearly influencing him. At one point in the trailer, he even says, I'm the only one that can tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And all of this is a big question mark. Desmond Hart does not exist in the Sisterhood of Dune book. And if memory serves, there really isn't anyone who's very analogous to his character either, like at least not directly.
Yeah.
Maybe pieces and parts of him are borrowed from certain characters.
I was going to say like the Manfred Torondo's
character
who kind of bullies around Salvador and kind of gets his way all the time and has this sort of militant group he leads around. Yeah. All of that's possible. but we actually think it might be going a different direction.
Yeah.
And we think this is more going to tap into maybe like early echoes of Paul Atreides rather than the sort of like fanatic leader that Manfred Toronto represents.
Yeah. And the reason we say that is because in this trailer, he actually claims that he has been gifted. He's been given some power and he's on a mission to take down the Sisterhood. He very explicitly says that to Valia in this trailer. So he's clearly the one of the primary antagonists here for the Sisterhood to face off against.
Yeah.
And
And specifically, she says, "What do you want?" He says, "To wipe out every trace of the sisters from our worlds. That's why I've been gifted a great power."
a great power.
And
And
Javo
what that
Carino
power
says,
could be, of
"Fucking
course.
sold."
Yeah, right. Javico's like, I'm in.
I'm
Are we-
sick. Do we fist bump now or do we hug? What's your vibe?
Can you 360 no scope with that great power? Or
Oh my God, his leader, he's on the leaderboard, the Call of Duty leaderboard. This is crazy. He's so cool.
right, Javico's COD game is not great. He really needs Desmond's help.
His KD ratio sucks.
Obviously, what that power is, we don't know. We're speculating that he's great at Call of Duty, but it's likely not that. What it may be, and this is pure speculation on our part, but what it may be is some type of early prescient ability a la Paul Atreides. And maybe Desmond is like a very early sort of proto-accidental Kwisatz Haderach character.
Right. Yeah.
That makes the Bene Gesserit aware of these abilities, maybe. That sets the scene for things to come down the line. We don't know. A lot of question marks around this character, but that's at least where our mind goes, is some sort of early prescience at play here.
Yeah. One of the things that it is worth knowing about the Sisterhood of Dune book is that there are these women who are the sorceresses of Rosic. And the sorceresses of Rosic have actual literal sorceress powers. But there is also this question in Sisterhood of Dune of the daughters or descendants of sorceresses of Rosic having powers and being tied to the sorceresses of Rosic, giving you this kind of, maybe you have abilities. So there's a possibility here that Desmond Hart is actually the son of maybe the forbidden child of a sorceress of Rosic.
Ooh.
Something we actually saw first on a website, cbr.com, was this theory that actually ties all of this to Paul in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
And at the time of Paul, Bene Gesserit are forbidden from teaching certain abilities to men. You know, this idea of they will have the Kwisatz Haderach, who is trained as a Bene Gesserit, but until that person, it's a no-go. And the fact that Jessica trained Paul in the ways of the Bene Gesserit is forbidden.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that rule come from? And where did it get established? Well, one possibility is that 10,000 years before Paul, there's Desmond Hart. And if Desmond Hart is the son of a Bene Gesserit, or he was simply trained as a Bene Gesserit, it's possible he's got insider knowledge about their powers. Maybe he has things like the voice, or maybe even abilities like prescience or psychic blasts or whatever the fuck. So all very interesting. Again, a lot of speculation here, but certainly makes sense why he's focused on eliminating the Sisterhood. Why? The Sisterhood is still branding itself. It's still kind of operating from the shadows, quote unquote, the hidden hand, the first episode. If the Bene Gesserit is still branding itself, why would someone be dedicated to getting rid of them unless Desmond Hart has insider information?
Yeah.
And so
sort
that's
of personal
that's the
vendetta, personal connection to the sisters.
Right. Yeah. Like maybe his mother was told not to have children because of X, Y, and Z, and then she did and had him, but then was killed for it and blah. Maybe that's the sort of line we're going down.
That would be interesting to see. I think Desmond is certainly one of the biggest puzzles of this show and of this trailer. And certainly I think a lot hinges on him. I think if he is a compelling character and a compelling force against which this Valia and the Sisterhood have to fight, it could make for a great show. Well,
Totally.
while we're on the speculation train, one other thing we wanted to speculate about is potentially the origins of the Sardaukar. So around 143 in the trailer, we see Desmond in all black, standing in the middle of a group of masked men, also in all black, walking through the halls of somewhere. And we know that the Emperor's feared and mighty military force, the Sardaukar, that exists in the primary books, are established somewhere, circa 10,000 years before the Dune books take place.
Yeah.
So, timeline wise, it would kind of make sense to also see the origins of the Sardaukar in this show.
Right.
To be clear, that's not a plot in the Sisterhood book.
Right.
But it could be an original plot that the show introduces.
Yeah. It's very Dune to focus on, if you think about the Carino, the person on the throne, as the ultimate prize for someone looking to exert control over the universe. You have the truth sayers, the Bene Gesserits, established at the side of the Emperor to be able to tell him the truth. And then the Sardaukar as the actual way that the Emperor feels he can control the Landsraad. And so you have these two directions in which the Emperor might be pulled, and we might be seeing that equilibrium be reached. And we know how it's going to end up, but it's fun to see maybe that initial battle. And that could be really cool. Again, tying these little strings together. A lot of speculation, but honestly, I think all of these ideas, we watched this trailer and I was like, oh, okay, kind of feeling whatever about it. The idea of someone just being like, I want to get rid of this the sisterhood. It's like, okay, why? But talking more about it and looking at the trailer a little bit more deeply and thinking about all this, I think I could really enjoy that sort of plotline.
Yeah, if some of what we talk about today and makes it ends up actually being in the show, I could really get behind it. Like, I think I would really enjoy if these plot lines were explored in this way.
For sure.
We'll have to see.
Yep.
Okay, we have two more details to go. Detail number 6 and detail number 7. So let's wrap up today. Detail number 6, jumping ahead to 2:05, around 2:05 in the trailer, we see a young Valia appear to use the voice on a shocked Sister Dorothea, who stops in her tracks, eyes wide. Valia, I believe, here screams, "Stop," and then says, "Take out your knife." This is kind of intercut with older Valia doing the very same thing to Desmond as they stand and talk to each other. So it's a little bit of editing trickery here. Then later, when we get the very flash cut back-to-back montage at the end of the trailer before the title card comes in, we get this blink and you'll miss it shot of Dorothea looking panicked, wide-eyed, and holding a knife up to her own neck.
Wow, yeah.
Seemingly from the same exact scene where Valia is using the voice. Now, why do we call this out? Well, there isn't any major hint of this in the trailer, but these two shots make it clear to me, at least, that this will likely be in the show. In the book, in Sisterhood of Dune, the book, there is this schism and power struggle within the Sisterhood, centered primarily on Valia and Dorothea, because once those two become Reverend Mothers, they want to take the Sisterhood in different directions. Dorothea in the book is actually this Butlerian sympathizer and kind of aligns with the fanatic Manfred Torando, who is not in the show, I think. Whereas Valia, who was trained by Raquella, clearly wants to take the Sisterhood in different directions. So there's differences of opinion, and there's a schism within the Sisterhood. The two of them kind of struggle to rise to the rank of Mother Superior and become the head honcho in charge, and thus steer the future of the Sisterhood. Obviously, this show takes place 30 years after the book, and we see older Valia in this show, in this trailer, so we kind of know who comes out on top here between Dorothea and Valia. But I think the flashbacks that we see here of young Valia kind of hint at this schism. We might not see the whole thing play out with the Sisterhood being split in two or anything. We'll likely just see sort of a personal stakes battle between Valia and Dorothea, maybe some disagreements. And it seems like we will also see the moment where the two kind of confront each other head to head, and it comes down to a dangerous moment here where Valia uses the voice on a fellow sister. It would be very cool and I think we will see this, it would be cool to see Valia's come up within the Sisterhood, because it is quite historic. She is one of the first ever Reverend Mothers, of course, as we said earlier, to ever be awoken, and her rise to the top is quite bloody and brutal. She is a Harkonnen after all. So I think through flashbacks, we may get some of that backstory here. Although I don't think it'll be a central point in the show. I think we'll, like I said earlier, I think we'll get it early in the first few episodes via these flashbacks to a younger Valia.
Yeah. Like Sisterhood of Dune begins with Valia Harkonnen being let in on the secret that the Bene Gesserit use computers.
They got Dells.
They have Dells. They have a whole data rack of Dells running Windows 7. And it's how they're keeping track 7. Of all of their... And
Windows Vista.
Windows Vista. Oh my God. They've got Netscape. They keep asking Jeeves about the future. It's very silly. But the in the trailer, we get this line, this endangers everything. There are secrets we have gone to great lengths to keep. And that is Tula speaking to Valia. It is possible, in the book, Dorothea awakens, discovers that computers are being used, and when she discovers the secret of the computers, she decides the Sisterhood has gone too far. We cannot do this evil, allow for computers to be used. That is not worth it. And we should reset the Sisterhood and I should be in charge.
Yep.
And that's the sort of Dorothea plotline. This secret that needs to be protected, Tula goes, we have secrets, and Valia maybe flashes back to, yeah, I've fucking murdered a lot of people to keep this secret as well, which we also see in Sisterhood of Dune. Rest in peace, Ingrid, you bastard. I don't like Ingrid. Point is, we are seeing a lot of this, and flashbacks, present tense, past tense. The showrunner's been very open that there are multiple kind of timelines, characters that are thinking back on these moments. We're going to see timeline and kind of non-linear storytelling happening throughout this series, probably. Yeah. So clearly, I think the overall 6-episode series is going to focus on the Emperor and Desmond Hart and this sort of battle for the throne. Nevertheless, the Sisterhood's internal struggle plays a part of that in Sisterhood of Dune, so we'll likely see some of that.
I agree.
Now, our final detail today that we're going to wrap up on is the role of prophecy and the role of things aren't always what they seem in a visual storytelling medium.
Yeah.
And this goes to a few shots that we see that are somewhat hard to take literally. The first one being at about the 1 minute, 1 second mark, which is an entire building being eaten by a sandworm.
Yeah.
A soul structure. And let's see if it's...
And the building itself kind of looks like a sandcastle, like just made entirely out of sand.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of if this is the Emperor's keep represented on Arrakis, how tentative, how weak it is. It's not stable. It's, this feels very allegorical. And some other things as well, some other moments. One that really, at first I thought was perhaps a prophetic vision, right? The woman seeing a bull at 2:14. She either has a very bizarre encounter with wildlife, or this is a vision of House Atreides, the end of House Atreides, perhaps. The bull that is House Harkonnen represents House Harkonnen. Like, bulls are very significant as an icon in the Dune universe. Right. We have the House Atreides are bullfighters historically. So the bull appearing to this woman could be a very far-flung reference to House Atreides specifically.
Mm-hmm. I agree. There's also the shot of sand falling or something falling from the ceiling and this sister holding out her hand to it. That doesn't quite feel real. Like the way the sand is there, it doesn't feel like that would be any sort of real structure. So that feels like another moment in the trailer that was some sort of vision.
Yeah, so I pulled it up. This is at 1:33. The fact that, because this room is the room actually where Valia screams stop to Dorothea. The hole in the floor is visible there. That being said, this kind of sand pouring and the two figures reflected, that feels like a vision. Or this feels like this is a room where someone's having a prophetic vision. Now, the central sort of prophecy that I think they might be talking about, which also would add some interesting juice to the show,
Yeah.
is in Sisterhood of Dune, the Sisterhood uses their Dell computers running Windows Vista to realize they use the prophecy application, and it tells them the Emperor Salvador Carino, if Salvador Carino is allowed to have children, the empire will crumble, billions dead, terrible stuff will happen.
Yikes.
Calamity will fall upon
Mm-hmm.
humanity. So there's this secret plot to sterilize Salvador Carino,
Mm.
controlling the breeding, stopping the emperor from having a kid. Could be an example that also would pit the Sisterhood in part against the Carino throne, which could also be interesting. Plans within plans and all that.
Agreed. Yeah, that would be a really fun plot line. Plus, again, speaking of this show taking place 10,000 years ago and setting the foundation and the precedent for things that are the norm by the time we get to Paul's time, the Bene Gesserit are super into breeding by the time we get to Paul.
Yeah,
Paul is the
same,
result
same.
of
Oh,
thousands
right.
of years of
Yeah.
breeding
Uh-huh.
and thousands of years of the Bene Gesserit from the shadows meddling with the genetic lines of the great houses, mixing and matching them in ways that are appropriate for their plans. This prophecy about Emperor Carino and his children could be one of the first times they dabble in doing that and actually coming forward and tampering with the genetic line, the children, the marriages of people in the Imperium, of the great houses and of the Emperor. This could set a precedent for that Bene Gesserit practice. Part of this show is going to be doing a lot of that. It's going to be a lot of us being the Leonardo DiCaprio meme, going, oh, that's a thing that the Bene Gesserit are going to do in 10,000 years. Cool. That's the first time they're doing it. And so this could be one of the central plots of this show could be the Bene Gesserit leaning into their breeding program and leaning into prophecy. And I think you're right. It would be fun. It would be fun to pit the Bene Gesserit against the Emperor in this way, in which they have to control him in a way that doesn't also put a target on their backs.
So all very interesting. I think we're going to be really excited to see. And honestly, I think through our conversation, I am more excited for the show and less skeptical based on the trailer.
Same.
Unfortunately, the reality is like, I think on paper, all of these ideas we've talked about are interesting and could be good if they're well written and if they're well executed. And that's the challenge of some of Brian Herbert's writing. I like the idea of seeing the origins of these things. There's a moment in Sisterhood of Dune where one of the Sisterhood, the Kari Mentat, brings juice of Sappho to Gilbertus Albans and goes, let me introduce you to this idea, the juice of Sappho for Mentats, which is great. But it also feels like it's completely inconsequential, doesn't do anything in the book, kind of just feels like maybe fan service, maybe quickly tying things up as efficiently as possible. But then that sort of efficient making this the beginning of everything can also make the universe feel small, where this is the only thing that has ever happened. This little section of events is really impactful and dense. And then there's 10,000 years of not a lot going on, and then Paul Atreides. And I think I would be happy if this show handled certain things and left certain things out for additional shows, for additional series, for additional properties, and doesn't feel the need that I think Sisterhood of Dune felt implicitly to shoehorn in a lot of plot points that maybe do pay off later, but don't pay off within the context of this one IP or this one, storytelling bout.
Yep.
Story arc.
I couldn't agree more. I think, there's a larger conversation to have about fan service that I would love to have at some point because I have a complicated relationship with that. And we've certainly seen egregious and terrible fan service from Star Wars in particular. But it can also, when done well, be a spectacular moment that really surprises and delights the fans that have been there the longest. The fans that have read everything and consumed the expanded lore and bought the additional comics and whatever, and for them to get like an amazing little detail that, to your point, fits within the current story that's being told and isn't just shoehorned in as an amazing detail to be like, hey, super fans, remember this? Cool, here's a carrot we're dangling for you.
Yeah.
Versus like, this totally makes sense. And like, whether or not we're dangling the carrot, the characters would have done this anyway in the story. But as an added bonus, it's a little carrot. So
Yeah.
I think fan service is a very delicate thing to do. And I agree. I hope the show doesn't fall into the same trap that, frankly, a lot of Brian's fucking prequel books do, which is like, I have to explain the thing from Frank's book that we saw. I have to write Sappho juice in here somehow, even if it makes zero fucking sense.
Yeah.
I have to have so-and-so character. I mean, there's some nonsense about the guild and navigators that just like utterly is bullshit from Brian's books. But again, we'll get into that. We'll talk about that in the actual book episode. But I couldn't agree more. I think we're totally aligned on that, Leo. And I agree. I think this conversation and this sort of like frame by frame analysis we did of the trailer together has genuinely gotten me more excited for the show.
Yeah.
And I'm now really looking forward to watching it, regardless of what it ends up being. I think it'll be fun to dive into it together and pick it apart.
+1 thumbs up to that, buddy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's our very deep dive analysis of a 3-minute trailer and some of the tidbits we know from the Sisterhood book that may or may not show up in the show. Again, the show is very close. It is, by the time you listen to this episode, dear listener, it's only like a week away. And we will be covering it on the podcast. So stay tuned for our coverage of Prophecy as that show comes out. But that's it for today. Before we let you go, a couple of very quick reminders, as always, on how to support us and how to keep in touch with us.
And the 2 best ways to support what we do here at Gamjabar, first, is become a patron over at patreon.com/Gamjabar. And we have Dune-themed swag. So if you want a cool shirt to wear while watching Dune Prophecy, check out gamjabarshop.com.
I personally don't wear shirts when I watch TV.
Shirtless.
I don't know about everybody
every
else.
Time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you do the Vaseline all over your upper body like I do when I watch a show?
No, but that sounds really great. Maybe I should start doing
If you plastic wrap your couch, you can also kind of slide around. It's really fun.
Yeah,
cool.
It becomes like a slip and slide situation.
Whee! Yeah.
That sounds, frankly, like the ideal way to consume television.
Dear listener, what's your ideal way to consume television? Let us know. Email us at gamjabarpodcast@gmail.com.
How much Vaseline do you use?
How much Vaseline do you use, dear listener, when you watch your favorite TV series? Send us your thoughts, your questions, your comments. If we missed any details, we didn't really actually want to spend 3 hours talking about this 2-minute trailer. So there are some things that we didn't talk about. But for sure, if you see something that is really cool, let us know. So email us, gamjabarpodcast@gmail.com. How much Vaseline, just in ounces?
Yeah.
Or grams? How do you measure Vaseline? In scoops.
In handfuls. That's how I measure things.
Handfuls, fingerfuls of Vaseline, yeah.
Scorch.
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 That's for the ASMR version of this episode, yeah.
That's true. Well, friends, there is no real ending. It's just the place where you stop the recording. But this podcast is always one step beyond logic, so help spread the word of Muad'Dib and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at @lore_party. We're also on TikTok at Gamjabar Podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, whoever controls the podcast controls the universe. We'll see you on the Golden Path.